Good morning, students. Let us begin from here today. He left the general's presence. These are the lines from the textbook. Then and went home, thinking over the plan. In this way, the whole thing would be taken out of his hands. He would tell Hannah nothing, since she would be timid. Timid means fearful. At the idea of assassins. Assassins means here professional murderers, killers in the house, and yet certainly such persons were essential in an absolute state such as Japan was. How else could rulers deal with those who opposed them? Some meanings are here. Timid means showing lack of courage or confidence. Absolute state means a state run by kings having total powers. Let us have the explanation of the above passage. Sadao went back home, and on the way he kept on thinking of the plan that he had made along with the general. He thought that in this way he would not be involved in the death of that American. He planned that he would not tell Hannah anything about this plan. Hannah would not like the idea of the hired killers coming to their house, but such persons were essential in a place like Japan. It was the only way for the rulers to deal with their opponents. So you can say that here political scenario has been involved absolutely. So we can focus that in such a country sometimes such illegal works are to be done for the betterment or to deal with the crucial problems. Further lines from the textbook are: he rushed to allow anything, he refused to allow anything but reason to be the atmosphere of his mind as he went into the room where the American was in bed. But as he opened the door, to his surprise, he found the young man out of bed and preparing to go into the garden. Reason means here an idea backed by common sense. Explanation is Sadao did not let any thought enter his mind as he went into the room where the American man lay asleep. He was surprised to see the man out of his bed. He was getting ready to go out into the garden. Further lines from the textbook are: what is this? He exclaimed. Who gave you permission to leave your room? Explanation is Sadao was shocked as he asked him that who had permitted him to stand and walk. Further lines from the textbook are: I am not used to waiting for permission, Tom said gaily. Tom means here that escaped prisoner, American. Gaily means happily. Goes, I feel pretty good again, but will the muscles on the side always feel stiff? Stiff means somewhat tough. Explanation is here Tom was happy and said that he was not in habit of taking permission before doing anything. He said that he felt good again, just the muscles on the sides of his body were stiff and rigid. Further lines from the textbook are: is it so? Sada inquired. Inquired means here asked, and he was surprised also. He forgot all else. Now I thought I had provided against that. He murmured. He lifted the edge of the man's shirt and gazed at healing scar. Massage may do it, he said, if exercise does not. Murmured means here said very slowly. Gazed at means looked at. Explanation of the above passage is Sada was surprised to hear that he forgot all work and said that he had warned the man not to stand and walk. He lifted the man's shirt and inspected the scar. He said that massage could heal it if it would not be healed by exercise. Further lines from the textbook are: "It won't bother me much," the young man said. His young face was gaunt under the stubbly blond beard. "See, doctor, I have got something I want to say to you. If I hadn't met a Jap like you," Jap means Japanese, "well, I wouldn't be alive today, I know that." Sadao bowed, but he could not speak. Gaunt means here gloomy or weak. Stubbly means unshaven, bearded. Blonde means light colored or yellowish color. Okay, as Americans are. Explanation is: the man said that the scar would not trouble him. His young bearded face was weak. He thanked Sadao and said that if he had not reached Sadao that day, then he would have died. Further lines from the textbook are: "Sure, I know that," Tom went on warmly, his big thin hands gripping a chair were white at the knuckles. "I guess if all the Japs were like you, there wouldn't have been a war." Gripping means here holding tightly. Explanation of the above passage is: Tom added that he was sure of that as he held the chair tightly with his thin hands. The knuckle turned white in color. Knuckle means here the joint of the fingers over here. This indicated that he was still weak and had not recovered fully. Tom added that if all the Japanese people would have been like Sadao, then the war would not have been happened. Further lines from the textbook are: "Perhaps," Sadao said with difficulty, "and now I think you had better go back to bed." So, dear student, let us have the explanation of these lines. Sadao said that maybe that could be true. He added that the man should go to sleep. Further lines are: "He helped the boy back into bed and then bowed. Good night," he said. Explanation is: he helped the man lay in bed, bowed to him, said good night. It means in Japanese culture, in order to have a respect, so they used to bow just before while saying good night, good morning, etc. Further lines from the text are: Sadao slept badly that night. Badly means here that he was not able to sleep peacefully. Time and time again he woke, thinking he heard the rustling of footsteps, the sound of a twig, twig means a branch of a tree, broken, or a stone displaced in the garden, a noise such as men might make who carried a burden. Rustling means here the sound made by footsteps, twig means branch of tree, burden means here it refers to a dead body. Explanation of the passage is: Sadao was restless all through the night as he felt that he hired killers were there to kill the man. He imagined hearing the sound of footsteps, branches being broken, stones moving as men walked on them, and imagined that he heard such a noise which indicated that some men were carrying the American's dead body. All this anxiety kept him awake. Further lines from the textbook are: the next morning he made the excuse to go first into the guest room. If the American were gone, he then could simply tell Hannah that so the general had directed. But when he opened the door, he saw at once that there on the pillow was the shaggy blonde head. He could hear the peaceful breathing of sleep, and he closed the door again quietly. Quietly means here peacefully. Shaggy means hairy. Dear students, let us have the explanation of the above passage. In the morning, Sadao made an excuse to go into the American man's room first. He had planned that if the man was gone, then he would tell Hannah that the general had ordered for him to be removed from there. When he opened the door, he saw the man who had lots of yellowish colored hair was asleep. He could hear the sound of his breathing. Sadao closed the door of the room. So you can say that the first night he kept on waiting for the killers, but they didn't return or they didn't come. Further lines from the text are: He's asleep, he told Hannah. He's almost well to sleep like that. Explanation is: Sadao said to Hannah that the man was asleep. He added that now he was well and did not need to sleep like that. What shall we do with him? Hannah whispered her old refrain. Refrain means here that oft repeated lines. Whispered means said slowly. Explanation is: Sadao shook his head. I must decide in a day or two, he promised. These are also the lines from the text. Refrain means here a sound that is repeated time and again. It means time to time. Explanation is here: Hannah again asked Sadao that what would they do with the man. The man means here that escaped prisoner. Sadao shook his head and promised her that he would decide it in 1 or 2 days. But certainly he thought the second night must be the night. There rose a wind that night, and he listened to the sounds of bending boughs and whistling partisans. Boughs means here branches of trees. Partitions means structures dividing a room into parts. Explanation of the above lines is: Sadao thought that perhaps the killers would come the next night. The night was windy. He heard the sounds made by the branches as they bent due to the wind, and the partitions made whistling sound as the wind passed through them. Hannah woke too. Ought we not to go and close the sick man's partition? She asked. Explanation is: Hannah woke and asked that should they close the partition door of the man's room. Further lines from the textbook are: No, Sadao said. He is able now to do it for himself. Explanation of the above lines is: Sadao refused and said that the man was capable to do that himself. But the next morning the American was still there. The next morning the American was still there in the room. This is the explanation of the above line. Further lines from the textbook are: Then the third night, of course, must be the night the wind changed to quiet rain, and the garden was full of the sound of dripping eaves and running springs. Sadao slept a little better, but he woke at the sound of a crash and leaped to his feet. Eaves means here part of the roof that meets or overhangs the wall of a building. Further explanation of the above passages: Sadao was hopeful that they might come. They means here the killers, professional killers, political murderers means assassins, might come on the third night. Instead of the wind, there was rain that night. The garden was full of noises as the water dripped down the roof and tiny rivulets flowed through the garden. Sadao slept a little and jumped as he heard a loud noise. Further lines from the text are: What was that? Hannah cried. The baby woke at her voice and began to wail. Wail means began to weep. I must go and see. But he held her and would not let her move. Sadao, she cried, what is the matter with you? Don't go, he muttered, don't go. His terror infected her and she stood breathless, waiting. There was only silence. Together they crept back into the bed, the baby between them. So meanings are: wail means here cry loudly, infected means affected, crept means crawled. Explanation of the above passage is: Hannah heard the loud crash and asked what it was. The baby also woke up and started crying. Hannah wanted to go and check on it, but Sadao stopped her. Hannah screamed at him and asked what the matter was. Sadao spoke slowly and asked her not to go. He was scared, and his scare affected Hannah too. She stood without breathing and waited. There was silence, and both of them crawled back into the bed with the baby lying on the bed in between them. Yet, when he opened the door of the guest room in the morning, there was the young man. He was very gay, gay means happy, and had already washed and was now on his feet. He had asked for a razor yesterday and had shaved himself, and today there was a faint color in his cheeks. So, these are the lines from the textbook. Gay means here happy, washed means bathed. There was a faint color in his cheeks means his pale yellow colored cheeks were turning pinkish in color, which indicated that he was recovering. Explanation is, in the morning, Sadao went into the guest room and saw the man was there. He was happy and had taken his bath and had started moving around. He had borrowed a razor from Sadao the previous day and had shaved his beard. The color of his cheeks was slightly pinkish, which indicated that he was recovering and regaining good health.